The autumn of 1889 was a liar in the high passes, mild days that whispered there was still time, while every hearth burned through its winter reserve. James Calder returned from the east, carrying a worn satchel and a certainty that made his brother William uneasy.
I'll build a stone bed that stays warm all night on a handful of kindling.
The cold here doesn't bend to fairy tales, brother.
I saw it. In Korea, an old mason heated a room for 12 hours with a fire that died before midnight.
At Henderson's general store, James spoke louder, and the valley's judgment came fast.
You'll poison yourself with invisible air. Stone holds a tomb's silence as well as heat.
The men at the stove laughed into their coffee.
They didn't understand, but winter would teach them soon enough.
James went to the old quarry alone, his back aching before the first stone touched his shoulders. Inside his cabin, James knelt over a trench gouged into the dirt floor, laying flat stones into a labyrinth that meant nothing to anyone else.
You are burying good stone to save a few logs. Even the Chinese don't sleep on heated floors.
Koreans. And every winter their children live while ours freeze under 3 blankets and a dying stove.
Fine. Show me the secret. But if this thing cracks before Christmas, I'll say, I told you so at your funeral.
They worked in silence for hours, the only sound the knock of stone on stone as the flue took shape beneath James's memory of a winter on the other side of the world.
An old mason named Park Sunday Wu poured tea on his floor to show me the water never froze. Then he drew the flue in the dirt and made me build it blindfolded.
Either he's gone mad or he's telling the truth. I can't decide which frightens me more.
By dusk, James fed a handful of kindling into the firebox and waited.
Touch the stone. It is already warmer than your skin, and the fire is gone.
It feels haunted. Stones shouldn't hold heat like that.
Bend down. Feel it with your whole palm. That is not witchcraft, William. That is geometry, older than Rome.
At 3 in the morning, William rose from his own cold bed and walked barefoot across the frozen floor of the cabin. He pressed both hands flat against the stone. The heat was still there, steady, invisible, defying the night.
He's done it. The fire's been dead for hours and the stone still breathes warmth.
By noon, Dr. Charles Avery appeared at the door with a medical bag and a face that had already decided the verdict.
Incomplete combustion leaves a vapor heavier than grief. You'll wake up dead, James. He knelt and tested the seams, shining a lantern into the flue. The smoke drew clean, but he refused to believe.
Charles departed with a warning and no curiosity, leaving William standing by the door, his secret a weight in his chest. That night, James spread a blanket over the stone and lay down alone, the amber glow beneath him, the only light left in the valley.
Let winter come. This stone remembers fire longer than men remember scorn.
Winter fell on the valley like a verdict. The temperature sank to 20 below and stayed there. Men woke to find their woodpiles halved. The air ate through their reserves faster than they could split another log. In James Calder's cabin, a single armful of sticks kept the stone breathing all night.
I felt it. At 3 in the morning, the stone was still hot. Your brother is seducing you with heat that seems miraculous. But lungs don't bargain with miracles. Then explain why he isn't dead yet.
The town council met that evening, their breath hanging in the room. Like a jury, they voted to discourage the platform, citing the doctor's warning and the risk of invisible poison. James heard the news and said nothing. He simply added another stone to the firebox and lay back down. Outside, the valley burned logs like currency, while a single man slept on borrowed heat from a dead fire, untouchable. William began hauling stone to his own cabin, the flue design etched into his memory from that one night of impossible warmth.
I stood in your fireless house at 3 in the morning and felt the stone argue with winter. I can't ignore what my own hands proved.
Dr. Charles Avery sat at his desk that same evening and wrote to the county medical board. I urge the board to issue a warning against the so-called heated stone bed. The risk of carbonic oxide inhalation, though unseen, is fatal beyond any momentary comfort. The town gathered again, this time inside James's cabin, the protest written on their breath as they crowded around the platform.
The fire went out 6 hours ago. Place your hand on the stone and tell me it is not still warm.
Warmth is not safety. The vapor pools low, where a sleeping man breathes deepest.
The meeting ended in a fractured silence. Half the valley now whispered that the stone might be real. The other half clutched the doctor's fear like a shield. Elias Parks, 72 and widowed, burned his last split log that night, staring into a cold stove that offered nothing more.
Another freeze like this, and I won't see the thaw.
Elias, my house is warm. Come. The stone holds heat without burning through a fortune in wood.
I've heard the doctor's warnings, but I've also heard the cold whispering through my empty woodpile. I'll come.
That night, Elias Parks lay on the heated platform, his hands pressed flat against a warmth that asked nothing more than a few sticks.
I woke twice. The fire was dead, but the stone stayed warm. I have never slept so soundly.
You could have killed him. An old man's lungs are fragile. A leak in that flue would have turned him blue by morning.
He was freezing to death in his own bed, Charles. Where was your medical board then?
Before Charles could reply, a cry spread through the valley. A northern blizzard would hit in 2 days. Temperatures passed 40 below. That night, the mercury froze solid in its tube, and still the air bit deeper. The valley counted its firewood like hoarded bread, and every face knew the arithmetic of a long night. Elias Parks, alive and warm, became the first proof and the first target of a fury that had not yet found its shape. The blizzard hit 12 hours early, swallowing the pass and every road out of the valley in an hour.
Elias can't stay in that frozen cabin. We'll build a platform in the barn, tonight.
You'll kill yourselves quarrying in this. The sheriff must stop this madness before we lose more lives.
The sheriff looked at the frozen mercury, then at the old man shivering on a pile of hay, and simply said, "Be quick."
Keep the stones close to the wall. The wind will steal our mortar before it sets.
In the barn, lit by 2 trembling lanterns, they laid flue stones with hands already raw and bleeding.
The slope must be perfect. If smoke lingers in a low joint, it will fill a sleeping man's lungs.
By midnight, the platform coughed its first thin smoke, and the stone began to answer the fire with a low, steady warmth. Elias Parks was lifted from the frozen hay and laid on the barn's new stone bed, his thin body finally still from shivering. Outside, the blizzard sealed the valley tighter than a coffin, but inside, the stone whispered its ancient promise of borrowed fire. By the second day, cold sank past 30 below and held as if the mountain had swallowed all the world's heat. In a cabin near the creek, a child of 4 stopped crying and never woke. Charles burned his last chair at dawn, then his last medical journal, then nothing but cold.
I cannot freeze in my own house while that foreign floor keeps him warm.
A writer reported the mercury would hit 40 below and break the glass. Charles wrapped his coat around his doubt and walked into the white mouth of the storm. 200 yards to James Calder's door, each step stripping another layer of pride. He reached it half frozen, spectacles ice, hands too stiff for a fist. He beat the wood with his forearm. The sound swallowed and beat again. Inside, James heard a knock he never expected. the desperate fall of a frozen hand.
Get inside. The cold is already past your coat.
I have no right to be here, James.
The stone doesn't ask for rights. It only remembers what it's given.
They lay side by side as the fire collapsed to embers, and the stone returned its stored warmth like a slow tide. Outside, the ox in the Henderson barn froze on its feet, breath becoming ice before it could leave the lungs.
My stove burned out hours ago, yet my hands are still warm. How is this possible?
At dawn, Charles bent to the flue opening, inhaling deliberately. No dizziness, no poison, only the dry scent of stone and dead smoke.
The draft carries every vapor out. In Korean, they call it the dragon's breath that never returns.
I've written letters against you. I called this floor a tomb.
James said nothing. He fed another splinter to the firebox and watched the doctor's shoulders finally lower.
Draw it for me, James. The whole labyrinth from firebox to chimney. I need to understand.
The firebox here. Then the flue slants upward 1 inch per foot. That's the secret the master taught me.
It's a thermal flywheel. The stone is the trap. I was wrong, James. I wrote letters. I warned the council. Everything I said was born of pride. Let me help you now. My hands are still steady. Give me a job.
The door crashed open. William Calder, eyes wild, snow welded to his beard.
2 more dead on the lower road. The wood at the store is gone. This freeze won't stop.
The town hall floor is solid earth. We could build there. Big enough for 20.
We gather every man who can lift a stone. The cold might break us, but not before we lay the last slab.
They stepped out into the screaming white. The weight of the valley, now a promise rather than a judgment. They burst into the town hall, shaking snow from their coats, shouting for every able hand. The blizzard was the new enemy, and time had run out.
I was wrong. The stone bed works. I've slept on it. Now, put aside your pride and pick up a shovel, or we'll bury more children.
We need stones from the quarry, firewood for the first light, and men who can follow a chalk line. If you can't lift, you hold the lantern.
William led a crew through the drifts, their wagon creaking under a load of frozen stone. A knot of older men stood with arms crossed, muttering about pagan floors and invisible poison.
I felt that stone's heat deep in my bones. If it were poison, I wouldn't be standing here.
A young man threw down his coat, then another. Shovels and crowbars lifted, and the hall filled with the grunt of stone against stone.
Set this flat, the flue turns here. 1 bad joint and the smoke backs up.
Charles shed his doctor's coat and dragged stones beside the men he once warned. By dusk, the flue trench curved across the hall, the first heavy slab settling into place. But the hardest hours still lay ahead. As the last sliver of sun vanished, James fed a bundle of dry sticks into the firebox, and the flue drew its first real breath.
Bring them in. Every widow, every elder who can't lift an axe. This floor is for them.
They shuffled in, clutching blankets, their faces etched with the arithmetic of too many cold nights.
I slept on a slab not half this size. My old bones thawed for the first time in weeks.
A child pressed her hand flat and smiled, the first real smile since the cold came.
The smoke is running true. I can feel the draft pulling. No vapor can linger.
By midnight, 20 souls sat shoulder to shoulder on the stone, their breath no longer visible. A knot of holdouts still sat apart near the door, but even they had stopped shivering.
The stone will hold till morning. We've bought ourselves a night.
Outside, the storm shrieked on, but inside the ancient geometry of borrowed heat pushed back the cold for 1 more hour. A choked flue in a cabin at the edge of town turned a dying ember into a wall of flame. The holdouts stumbled into the blizzard, coughing smoke, dragging a charred rafter across the snow. William pressed his face to the frosty window. Torches were moving against the white.
James, they're outside. They've got torches and a burnt rafter.
James threw back the bar and stepped into the circle of firelight, the wind knifing at his coat. A charred plank was thrust at his chest. A voice screamed that the foreign floor had nearly killed them. The mob pressed in. James raised his hands, the torchlight carving his face into something older.
The fire was a flaw in the flue, not the stone. Let me explain before you undo all we've built.
The crowd surged. Tear it down. They pressed toward the hall, the charred rafter like a battering ram.
If I don't share the master's secret, they'll destroy everything. Listen to me. The flue must rise 1 inch per foot. Every inch flat is a dam waiting to choke.
He snatched a stick and drew the secret in the snow, a clean line sloping upward, the ancient geometry that held a village safe.
Their platform was built flat, smoke stalled, then the creosote caught. It was not poison, it was a dam of dead air.
I slept on his floor and woke without a headache. The stone is safe. The man who built it forgot the slope.
A voice from the back, thin from smoke. Can you fix it?
I can, and I will teach every man here the slope, the vent, the draft. This knowledge isn't mine to bury.
The charred rafter dropped into the snow. A man wept, not from cold, but from the shame of his own fury.
We start at dawn. Bring any stone you can carry. Every flue in this valley will breathe right by sundown.
William lifted a lantern high. Charles rolled up his sleeves. The mob, broken, became a work crew before the torches died. At first light, James knelt in the snow outside the hall, tracing the flue's path with a stick, while a dozen men watched in silence. The valley became a workshop of frozen hands and chiseled stone. James led crews from cabin to barn, rebuilding the flue slopes 1 inch at a time.
James, you haven't slept. Sit down for an hour.
But the mercury held at 40 below, and the valley's last flour was divided by the spoonful. Still, the town hall platform never cooled. Families who had burned their furniture now slept shoulder to shoulder on borrowed stone. James's hands were raw, split by cold and stone, but he refused every blanket offered.
My body will answer later. Right now, the flues come first.
At the Henderson cabin, James set a final slab and buckled. William caught him before his head struck frozen earth.
Lay him on the stone. His pulse is thready. He's burned through everything.
Charles wrapped him in every coat he could find, but he didn't move him from the stone. The platform was already doing what medicine could not. William picked up James's hammer. The cold showed no mercy, and the work could not stop. The valley held its breath. The thaw began not with warmth, but with silence, the wind finally dying, the sun a pale coin behind thinning clouds. Men dug out frozen doors and counted their dead. 5 had left for supplies and never returned. 2 children in the lower cabins.
But the hall stands, and James's cabin, and the barn. Every house with a stone floor still has a pulse.
James opened his eyes to the chill of water on his lips, and Charles's face bent over him.
You nearly built yourself into an early grave, but you are still on the right side of the dirt.
Did the flues hold?
Every one we fixed. The valley is battered, but not broken. You can stop now.
Elias Parks appeared at the door, a bowl of broth in his trembling hands, the last of his stores, for the man who had given him back the winter.
I had nothing left, but I saved this for you.
James took the bowl, his cracked hands steadier than they had any right to be. The valley was waking from a long nightmare, and every stone floor in it whispered of borrowed fire. Dr. Charles Avery sat at his desk long after the thaw, composing a letter to the county medical board. I have tested the stone platform under extreme conditions and found no carbonic vapor. The design, when sloped properly, vents completely. William Calder pored over the winter's fuel ledgers, scratching numbers onto a scrap of paper.
The platforms used 1/10 the wood of a conventional stove. 1/10. We could have heated the whole valley on a few cords.
The town council convened in a quiet hall. Without fanfare, they voted to keep every Ondol floor standing. After the vote, Charles found James walking slowly along the ridge. He extended his hand without a word.
You wrote the truth. That's more than I ever asked.
The report went out on the next mail wagon, and the valley's secret became a matter of record.
1/10, James. The math won't let anyone argue.
James stood in his cabin doorway, watching the valley thaw. The stone behind him was cold, but the geometry waited for winter. On the first Sunday after the thaw, the valley gathered on the green. Every face that had once laughed at James now stood in patient silence. The council chairman stepped forward, unfolded a paper, and read aloud the finding that ended the argument. The county medical board acknowledges no evidence of poison. The heated stone platform, properly built, is safe and efficient. A young mother with a child in her arms wept quietly. Her daughter had slept on the town hall stone and survived. The chairman turned to James. We owe you an apology and more. This valley would have buried half its families without your stone.
I only carried the knowledge. The wisdom came from a man on the other side of the world. When I was young and foolish in Korea, an old mason named Park Sunday Woo took me into his home and taught me that stone could be a hearth. He said, "A stone remembers heat longer than a man remembers kindness. I have only tried to honor that."
No one spoke for a long moment. Then Elias Parks, leaning on his cane, began to clap. The sound spread like thaw, and across the valley, in the silence of empty cabins, the stone floors waited, cold for now, but carrying the shape of a foreign kindness that had outlasted the winter. After the applause, a tight circle formed around James, men who had never traveled 20 miles, hungry for the story of the man who had taught a mountain valley to borrow fire.
He made me build the flue blindfolded, then made me sleep on it. When I woke warm, he said I had learned the stone's language.
James described the master's calloused hands and how he first felt a stone's impossible warmth in a Seoul winter 40 years past.
A stone remembers heat. We'll remember you both.
I'll include his name in my final report. Park Sunday Woo should be known to the medical community. Not as a superstition, but as a man of practical science.
He would want no name. He would just want you to be warm.
That summer, William carved a flat stone with the old mason's words in Korean and English and set it into the town hall floor. The characters read, "A stone remembers heat," and the phrase became a valley saying, repeated every winter when the flues were lit. No new cabin was built without an ondol. The foreign geometry that had saved them now belonged to the mountain as much as the pines.
Thank you, old master. Your fire found a new home.
That evening, Charles found James alone on the ridge, looking east toward mountains neither of them had ever crossed.
I was so certain I knew what was best. I nearly cost lives.
You were trying to protect them. That's not a sin.
Charles extended his hand, and James took it. The doctor's grip was steady for the first time since winter. William stood before a group of young men in the town hall, a chalk diagram of the ondol on the floor.
The flue must rise 1 inch per foot. Forget that, and a family freezes.
They laid stone while William corrected every angle, his hammer a teacher's pointer. In his own cabin, James took a chisel and carved a small Korean character into the edge of his platform, the symbol for fire.
Let whoever sleeps here know this came from the other side of the world.
And in his study, Charles finished his report, the name Park Sundae-woo, written in clean ink, no longer foreign, simply human. Late spring, and James Calder sat alone on his stone platform, the carved character for fire cool beneath his hand.
The master's hands are dust now, but the stone still speaks.
The door creaked. Elias Parks, leaning on his cane, stood in the threshold.
I came to say it proper. I'd be a frozen mound under the snow if not for you.
You brought me broth when I was too weak to lift a spoon. We're even, old friend.
Elias sat beside him on the cold stone, and for a long while neither man needed words. James would never cross the ocean again, never kneel before Park Sundae-woo, but the stone remembered for him. It carried a kindness across the world, and held it until the mountains understood. Outside, the valley greened, wildflowers pushing through the last patches of snow, and the ondol floors lay ready, cold stone with a borrowed memory, waiting for the next fire. A year later, a traveler with a worn notebook came down the mountain road, his breath still carrying the memory of the last steep pass. In every cabin he entered, a strange stone platform sat in the corner, cold now but clearly intentional. He found an old woman outside her door, her hands busy with spring planting.
She looked up and said, "A man who traveled east brought back a fire no wind could steal."
The traveler wrote the phrase in his notebook, the graphite scratching like a whisper from the other side of the world. He saw the carved stone in the town hall and traced the Korean characters with his finger. In a world that burned through forests to stay alive, this valley had learned to borrow warmth from a geometry of stone. He left the valley before the first snow, carrying a legend and a diagram he would later publish in an Eastern journal. But the true ending wasn't written. It waited in every stone floor, holding heat for some future winter that had not yet arrived. A single ember lowered into the dark, like a memory returning.